All right. Earlier today, President Biden announced in a statement that he has asked the U.S. intelligence community to, quote, redouble their efforts to collect and analyze information that could bring us closer to a definitive conclusion, end quote, as to the origin of the coronavirus. Now, the White House statement comes on the heels of Biden's chief medical and mask advisor, Anthony Fauci, who made this comment on May the 11th.
But no, I'm not convinced about that. I think that we should continue to investigate what went on in China until we find out, to the best of our ability, exactly what happened. Certainly, the people who've investigated say it likely was the emergence from an animal reservoir that then infected individuals, but it could have been something else. And we need to find that out. So, that's the reason why I said I'm perfectly in favor of any investigation that looks into the origin of the virus.
That's interesting because if anyone ever questioned where this virus came from, possibly coming out of the lab in Wuhan, they were discredited, saying that they were pursuing conspiracies. Well, apparently not so now. Joining me now to talk more about this, U.S. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who was one of the first out there asking these questions and, again, was said to be spreading conspiracy theories. Senator, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony, it's good to be back on with you. Thanks for letting a notorious conspiracy theorist like me join you.
Glad to have you on. I saw your tweet in response to the White House's statement, too little, too late.
This is too little, too late. And it's also directed at the wrong people. I mean, sure, our intelligence agencies should continue to try to get to the bottom of this, but they don't have the answers in their hands. The Chinese Communist Party does. And Joe Biden from day one should have been demanding answers from China. He shouldn't have been taking any steps to coddle or appease China as he has, and he should continue to demand those answers. Now, look, do I expect China to open up the Wuhan labs for an American or even an international team of scientists? Do I expect them, even if we did, that we would discover evidence that in all likelihood has been destroyed? No. But we should hold China accountable for this, and we should lower the boom on China for what they've done to the world over the last 18 months.
So now I guess I'm trying to figure out what has changed, because a lot of this information has been out there. You were raising questions over a year ago about and warning about what was coming out of China. End of last year, beginning of this year, there were reports out about these 3 researchers at the lab there in Wuhan, China, that were admitted to the hospital with flu-like symptoms. In fact, going back to an article that was in the Wall Street Journal on January the 15th of this year, it quotes then Deputy U.S. National Security Advisor Matthew Pottinger, who told international leaders at the end of last year, that would have been 2020, that intelligence points to SARS-CoV-2 having originated from the Wuhan Institute. That intelligence had not been made public, and China had denied the virus came from the lab. Also, when WHO went over to investigate the sources, they didn't even consider the lab as a possible source. They looked at the market. So, I mean, this is very troubling to me, and how this has really been covered up.
Yeah, Tony, I mean, the biggest change from last year to this year, of course, is that Donald Trump is no longer in the White House and Joe Biden is. And early last year, when I was pointing out, not on the basis of some kind of secret intelligence or other information, but just plain old common sense, Tony. It's like, guys, this virus didn't emerge from some mountain village next to a cave full of bats. It emerged in a city larger than New York, right down the street from the labs where they research dangerous coronaviruses. How about we ask them questions about that? As you say, the media referred to me as a conspiracy theorist, and then Donald Trump picked up what I was saying and they said that he's just repeating debunked conspiracy theories. The media was going to do nothing if it came from me, who, suffice to say, they don't like my politics, and certainly nothing if it was going to help Donald Trump's reelection.
But it's becoming very difficult for them to skirt the facts. The fact that now it's The evidence is there. You have these 3 researchers that had these flu-like symptoms at the same time last fall, and like you say, it doesn't. This is not brain. This is not brain surgery, not rocket science. You've got in the place where you have a lab at its doorstep, you have this outbreak. I mean, it only makes sense that you would want to look at the records of this laboratory, the security protocols, everything else that's there, but has not been looked at by WHO. In fact, when WHO went over there to look at it, they specifically did not look at the lab. So how are they going to get to the bottom of it if they don't look at what could probably be the primary source?
Yeah, I mean, the WHO mission was a joke. First of all, it was filled with a bunch of people who had no relevant expertise. The lead of it was like a food safety expert. They didn't get to interview the researchers and the staff of the lab. They didn't get to view the records. They basically sat in a conference room and got some coffee and donuts and were fed a PowerPoint set of lies by Chinese communist apparatchiks. Again, I'm not very hopeful that China is ever going to open up these labs and let us know what really happened there. Even if they did, they'd probably destroy the evidence. Now, it is possible. It's possible that we could have a whistleblower, a defector, something along those lines, someone who can corroborate what our basic common sense and what all the circumstantial evidence suggests. I think that's probably the best we will ever get, though.
So, Senator Cotton, a couple of questions based on this is why is it important now? And that's I'm setting you up because I've got views that says it is important, but I want you to explain to our listeners why you don't just let this go, why it is important that we identify where this virus came from. Was it an accidental release from this lab? Was it intentional? Where did it come from? Why is that important?
Well, let's remember why it would have been important, Tony, in October and November of 2019 if China had acted in a civilized fashion and told the world, told the WHO, told America and Japan and South Korea and Germany and other countries that could provide experts. Perhaps we could have kept this as a local outbreak. It wouldn't have become the worst pandemic in a century. But now it's important to remember what this shows about the nature of the Chinese regime. They are not only incompetent and negligent in this laboratory, if the virus came from the lab, but malevolent by covering it up and by showing the complete disregard for the lives of their own subjects, to include, and in addition to, the lives of people around the world. And China has to be held responsible for it. Like I said, it is time for the civilized world to lower the boom on the Chinese Communist Party and make it clear that we will not tolerate their lies and their nefarious actions anymore.
Earlier in the program, I had Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky on. Now, we weren't talking about this. We were talking about the Paycheck Protection Program, Planned Parenthood getting that money. But Senator Paul introduced a measure, which I think was approved by the Senate, that prohibits further funding from the United States to China, in particular to this lab, to do research on these viruses to basically, make these super viruses that can jump from animals to humans.
Yeah, Tony, it's really important that we get to the bottom of exactly what Tony Fauci and his agency at the National Institutes of Health was up to. Look, he's been playing word games, which is a charitable way to put it. Misleading the American people is another way to put it for the last few weeks on this question. It is an obvious and indisputable fact of public record that American taxpayers, because of Dr. Fauci's agency, provided hundreds of thousands of dollars to these labs in Wuhan. It is a matter of public record that these labs were conducting so-called gain-of-function research, trying to make these viruses more contagious and therefore more dangerous. Now, he's finally, in the last few days, started to acknowledge that he did so, yet he claims that, well, we had to do it. This is where coronaviruses emerged from. We didn't know they were doing this kind of research. It's like, well, why didn't they know it? So that raises questions about quality control and the way they monitor their grant recipients. And finally, Tony, these grants appear to have been made in explicit violation of at least the spirit, if not the letter, of a directive from President Obama not to fund this kind of very risky research for the exact reasons that we see now and what might have happened in Wuhan. Right. Is that although there can be valid reasons for this research, it also could creates the risk of an accidental lab breach.
Well, I would go a little bit further. The gain of function in terms of making these into super viruses, I guess there's, the scientists say there's a purpose in all of this, and I guess I can understand that. But why would we fund the Chinese Communist Party to do this research when, even on our best day, we don't trust them?
Yeah. Well, what Dr. Fauci has said is that, you've got to go to where the viruses are, and these viruses are in China, and they can't research them in Fairfax County. It's like, well, you know what? Viruses are transportable. You can go get the MERS virus in Asia and bring it to the United States to our labs and investigate it and research it, no matter what kind of research you're doing. Why should we be spending millions of our dollars supporting Chinese scientists on research that is going to benefit the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army?
Well, and also, I'm concerned that while this, if it did come from the laboratory, maybe we will or maybe we won't know, accidental, but if given what the Communist Party of China is up to, I don't trust them with this type of material and what they could do if they wanted to intentionally inflict harm upon the world.
Yeah, you're not the only one, Tony. I don't trust them to protect our athletes during the Olympics next year, and not to use their DNA samples to try to create the next generation of genetically engineered super athletes or super soldiers in the future. These are all part of China's explicit plans in terms of synthetic biology and their advances in medical science designed to establish Chinese primacy over the world. There's no links to which the Chinese Communist Party won't go to do so.
So let me ask you another question on this information as it's come out. What has brought us to this point to where this information now is even being acknowledged by the mask doctor, Dr. Fauci, in terms of saying, we do need to investigate this? Is this because people like yourself and others kept pressing the issue that now the facts can no longer be denied?
Yeah, so I and others in the Congress have been pressing these every time we get a chance to raise the issues in oversight hearings, to demand answers. You've seen it in real time over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Every time Tony Fauci appears, he begins to backpedal a little bit more. There has been what's characterized as new reporting. As you pointed out, the Wall Street Journal had a story earlier this week about these 3 scientists or staffers who were sick in the fall of 2019. But also the Trump administration released that information last January, and that gets to the more fundamental point, which is Donald Trump is no longer president. Joe Biden is president. So from the blue media's perspective, it's okay to actually look into these things now.
Oh, so but they're not accusatory in talking about this information. So now that this information is coming out, and at least there is a cloud of question over China and how it dealt with the investigation into the virus. As we pursue this and more information becomes available, and let's say we do, in fact, at some point in time verify or at least move beyond a reasonable doubt that it did come from the laboratory, what next? How does that impact our policy with China?
Well, Tony, as you know, China is already not terribly popular with the American people, nor should the Chinese Communist Party be popular. But imagine how China will be viewed, not just in the United States, but around the world, if it turns out that Chinese communist incompetence and deceitfulness was responsible for all the loss of lives, for all the illness, for all the destroyed businesses, for all the lost livelihoods. It will be time for the civilized world to lower the boom on China. Look, we have lots of pressure points. We can strip them and their families of visas. All these rich Chinese oligarchs don't get to go to American colleges and private schools anymore. We can introduce resolutions every week in the UN demanding that China come clean and have an investigation. We can strip them of their developing nation status at the World Bank, which allows them access to all kinds of special economic privileges and concessions. We can, in the United States, repeal their permanent normal trade relations, permanent most favored nation status, so they can no longer trade on favorable terms with our country. There is no end to the points of leverage that we we and the rest of the civilized world has, and we should use those points of leverage right now, in my opinion, because we already know they've been lying about it, but especially just imagine what world opinion will think if we find out that the Chinese Communist Party is responsible for this pandemic.
Absolutely. And the more information the American public has, the more leverage they will apply to the political leaders, even a party like that of Joe Biden that is reluctant to take on China. So the more information that's put out there, the greater chance China is held accountable. Senator Tom Cotton, as always, great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Tony.
All right, Senator.